Okay, so for this week's project, we're going to be taking a look at this Sony very banged up, very battered MDS-JE320 MiniDisc player. Picked this up on eBay about 3 weeks ago, and it was purchased as a parts or repair unit, but definitely not in this condition. There was an issue with the power button, as the seller stated in the auction description, but apparently it took some unbelievable shipping damage on the way here, probably due in part to the horrible shipping job. This thing was basically thrown into an old Amazon box with a bunch of plastic grocery bags as the packing material. So not really surprised that it's in horrible shape. The problem, like I said, was stated in the description, is the power button was pushed into the front panel and the unit wouldn't turn on. I've already taken this apart and had a look at it, and it has got some extensive damage to the front panel board, as well as some mechanism damage, which I've already mopped up, and I did make a video of me doing that. The seller went ahead and refunded my money, so we got nothing to lose. I'm gonna see if we can hardwire the front panel board back together and actually get this thing up and working. I bought this strictly as just a project for a video, and it's been a while since I've worked on one of these, so I didn't want to kind of go down that road as a trip down memory lane. So as always, we'll come in, we'll have a look at the extent of the damage, and there is a lot, and we'll see what we can do as far as the front panel circuit board is concerned. This week's intro music, we're listening to the Water album by Saigon Kick, and this band most people may remember from the album before this. It had a very popular ballad on it that they played to nauseating levels back when MTV was still doing that type of thing. But I didn't pay much attention to that. This album was given to me by a friend, and I took notice of a lot of different songs on this record. In particular, the one that we're starting out with, this is the lead track called One Step Closer. So let's hear a little bit of this, and then we'll get started on the Sony. Okay, so we'll pick up, and I've already kind of disassembled it so we can get a good look at what's happening here. And the picture from the original auction description did show this button being pressed into the front, but there was no crack there, and no crack there, and of course no crack here. And the diffuser for the front panel display was not broken, and this huge crack running along the top of the front of it was also not there. So basically just took a lot of shipping damage. As far as the controls on the front of this is concerned, obviously you do got the momentary power switch, then you'll come over here for your track advancement, and you're going to get a yes or no button. I would assume this is for finalization of the disc once it's recorded. Of course, a forward and reverse, play, pause, stop, record. Gives you a source input selector, either digital or analog, and it does have a rotary knob for the record level. And as far as this is concerned, it is pretty extensive. We have every trace on the interconnect of this board broken, and it looks to me like, from my count, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe about 14 traces. Luckily, I don't see any damage on this side, so we don't have that to be concerned about in the switchboard anyway. Continuing on the same board, coming over here to where the power switch is. And of course there's a pretty good fracture there. That one doesn't really concern me too much. There's a few traces there, but shouldn't be anything we can't put back together. I don't believe the front panel display tube is actually, I don't think it's broke. I think it's just the lens has slipped down and got knocked out of the front panel of this. We'll take that apart. Let's do that now, actually. Got some noise outside. I'm not sure what that's all about. This was the cheapest one that they had. It was $25, $27 actually with the shipping. And all the other ones on there were super expensive. I'm not sure why people thought that these were worth so much when they were broken, but let's get this out and have a look. And we did escape that. There is no issue there. That all looks to be intact. There's no cracks in it or anything, so it will be some work. There is no question. But I think I can probably put this back together. Probably glue some of the pieces back together in the front. Get this to the point to where we might be able to at least get it on. As for the mechanism, you will see that in the next clip. Before I was even considering this for a video, I wanted to make sure that I could get the mechanism working, or at least to the point to where it was working good enough. So I did make a quick video showing some of the work that I did on this. Didn't see anything on the main board. No fractures here at all. None that I can see anyway. So that we got this, the laser's there, it will load. It's a little clunky, but everything is working from the best I can tell. So it looks like the biggest deal is going to be this. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to start hardwiring some of it and just do what we can do to get it put back together as best as possible. And hopefully we can get this thing on and see if there's anything else wrong with it. And I would say I'm 50-50. Even if I can get all the traces hardwired, which I don't doubt that I probably can. I can run continuity on all of these and hardwire all of these point to point. It'll take time to do it, but I just don't know what kind of damage may have occurred when this thing impacted. Could have jarred that laser, could have created some kind of problem there that I don't know anything about. But I think it'll be a fun one. So I think what you're going to see next is you're going to see the clip that I made, I believe, October 30th on the mechanism. And then from that point, we'll pick up and we'll start the hardwiring process. I'll show you a few traces here. I'm not going to burn an extensive amount of time hardwiring this entire board. All right, so this clip is actually being made on October 30th. I received this unit yesterday, and unfortunately, due to some very poor packaging, it took some pretty nasty impact damage to the front of it. And when I actually get ready to do a video for this, which will probably be another week or so, I don't want to have to devote 45 minutes of the video to working on the mechanism, and the mechanism did take some damage. Basically what happened is it impacted the top portion of this inner sub-mechanism down to the bottom portion. And anytime you start bending up this very frail, very thin, very perfectly formed metal that slides against another piece of metal, anytime you start bending that up, then all of a sudden it works real jerky and not correct the way it's supposed to. So I spent about an hour yesterday, maybe about a half hour today, I had it all apart and straightened out the pieces as well as I could, and now I do have them actually moving the way that they're supposed to. This piece was a big problem. There was also an issue with this top right head that hangs over the top portion of the disc. that had to be taken apart. The gearing, I took the cover off of the gearing and got the timing of it back into you know, correct timing. And the whole thing, it definitely had some issues. The flip door was completely broken off, and basically what I did there is I melted and glued. I found the piece of plastic that goes right here on the end, and I melted and glued that back together so it could still be used. We could try to get the flip door back on it. We don't need the flip door in order to get it to work, but thought it'd be cool if we could get it back on there. So definitely got that taken care of. There is a piece on the center of it that is still broken, but unfortunately there's nothing I can do about that. We'll just have to deal with it as is. And so I got it to the point where I know it will accept a disc. We're gonna dump some voltage from the power supply into this bottom mounted circuit board right here. The only thing it has on it is just connections for wires and some switches, so we can feed voltage safely into the motor with no trouble. And we'll try to load a disc up in it. I've tried it a couple times. It's a little jerky, but it does work. And I think it might just be good enough to where if we can get the rest of that front panel hardwired back together, we may be able to get this thing to work. So let's go ahead and try it. Put our disc in and use our little jumper clip. And it does, it drops it down nicely. Everything is in position. It's laying on the spindle motor the correct way. So I think as long as there isn't any damage to the laser from the crazy impact that this thing took, we should be okay. And it spits the disc out pretty good too. Again, there was a couple of times, I've tried this a few different times, and there was a time or two that it was a little jerky about spitting the disc out, but it would still do it. It just didn't work perfectly like it was brand new. So I think we're gonna be okay. As long as there isn't any damage to, like I said, the laser and so forth, we should be all right. And see, that's another problem with it, is that sometimes it'll kind of take off, even though you've got the disc pressed in there, it'll kind of take off on its own. But I think I've got it good enough to where it should be okay. So hopefully, because that's a lot of hard wiring in that front panel over there. I'd hate to hardwire all that just to get to the point where it won't work. So. All right, I guess we'll pick back up on this when I actually do the video, which is probably going to be about a week from right now. So we'll see once we get the rest of it, if we can get the rest of it hardwired back together. All right, before we get too carried away, let's come in and take a quick look at some of the work I've done here. This is just basically to find some structure points to kind of blend the two boards together, or kind of fuse them back together, I guess would be a better way to put it. And what I did was locate the largest trace that was broken, that was shared between the two pieces, scraped away some of the material from the manufacturing process of the board, got it down to the copper, and basically just tinned it up and put a blob of solder right there, kind of making a little bridge between the two pieces. And then as far as this side, I went ahead and did the same thing. This is a nice wide trace right here. So I went ahead and did the same thing, just scraped away some of the material, got it down to the copper, and then laid a bead of solder right there. And I'll do the same thing on the second wide trace right here. We'll scrape this away and lay us a bead of solder there too, just help, to help strengthen the two pieces together. These smaller traces, this is something you should never do. Don't attempt to put any solder there and make a bridge there. It's possible to do it, but I wouldn't consider it to be very reliable. It would be just too small of a dab of solder, and it's possible it could break again. It's best just to hardwire all of these tiny traces from one point to the other. Same process on the other end of the board. Got a bunch of wide traces here, and so just kind of bridged those together as best as possible. And then of course the remaining ones will hardwire point to point. And I have a tendency when I start getting into the groove of something like this, I forget about the video, and I'm more focused on the work, so I figured this is a good time to stop and kind of give you an update. In the next clip, we'll throw the camera on top of the magnifier and we'll hardwire a few of these point to point just to give you my method for doing it. But there isn't really anything too challenging about hardwiring broken traces. The biggest thing is that when you have a lot of tiny ones, it's important to make sure that you get the correct start point and end point, so you don't hardwire one point to a point it's not supposed to be connected to. Did a little cosmetic work too. We'll take a look at that real fast. On this, basically just glued back the front. We'll zoom out for that. Glued back the front pieces with super glue. Didn't use anything too expensive, and wasn't really trying to get an A for cosmetics here. We were just trying to get it structurally back together where it would hold in place. And as for the window, took the same method the manufacturer basically uses, only just not as neat and clean. Basically just glued and melted that window back into the frame as best as I could. And this should be fine. We're just, at the end of the day, we're just trying to get this, you know, back to the point where it's functional and we can operate the buttons on it. And I did the same thing with a power button, put it back into the frame and just melted and glued it back together. The same thing with these posts. Unfortunately, the post, we need that to be a little bit more strong, so it will hold up that board. So I put a hole in there and put a screw through the front of it, coming into the bottom part of the post. That way when we get ready to put that board back in here, it'll lay in there and have a resting point. Glued the rest of the post in. They should be fine. We're not going to be applying a whole lot of pressure here. The only button that's on this end is just the power button, and we should be okay on that. Again, no broken traces on this side. So definitely not going to get any trophies for cosmetics here because it still looks pretty shitty, but it looks a lot better than it did before we started with it. So again, we're just looking to get it functional so we can see if we can get it working. So let's go ahead and I'll set the camera up for the overhead shot, and we'll find us some wire and we'll start hardwiring these point to point and see if we can get this thing up and going. So give me a second for that and we'll come back. Okay, so we'll pick back up, starting on our hardwiring here. And the first thing I want to do is start over at the very edge of the board where the fracture starts and kind of trace it over. And we know that the very first trace that's affected is the one that we scraped off and put a pad of solder there as a structural point. So the fracture continues on through that and doesn't affect these. This is on the other side of the board. This is on the broken side of the board, the smaller side. And then it comes to the very next one, which is going to be right next to this ground pad here. And if that wasn't here, I would just scrape away some material and put a bridge right there. But it's just a little too close to this, and there is the pin of another component, which is this right here, which is a resistor. I'm not sure how well that camera can pick that up, but there's a resistor right there that is underneath here too. So we're going to avoid this. And the very first place that we'll attach a wire is on obviously this side of the fracture, and it'll go to right here, which is just a small jump to that side of the board. And I've already kind of prepped these a little bit for the first few traces just to get us started. And the type of wire I'm using basically is just interconnect wire you would cut out of any television or piece of audio equipment that you're junking out. There's usually a fair amount of these type of, you know, plug-to-plug wires in any type of old audio and video equipment. So that wire works really well for jumpering. And so I prepped us a few wires, and the first one's just going to be a tiny one. I'm going to put it right here. And so we'll start on this side. I want that to sink in really nice. to where it almost looks like it came from the factory that way. I made it flip the board around just so we can easily get to the other side of it. And remember, the brake is right there, and so we're just going to attach it right here on the other side. And that'll be just fine. So moving on from that, then we know the very next one is going to be this one right here. And this is going to be the starting point on one side of the board. Then we have the fracture, and it goes, it's fractured in two spots, but we don't care about this. That's just the trace itself. There's no components there we have to be worried about. If it was fractured here and going to this component, we'd need a jumper from here to here first, and then from here on to the other side, but it's just a standalone trace. And so we'll follow it back over here, and we can see that it goes right there. In between these two traces that I've already done with the bridge, and it comes to this little jumper, which goes over and then goes to one of the pins on the connector. So we'll go ahead and put our wire there. And again, I made us up some jumpers here just to kind of get us going. And when I do this, I strip them off and tin them really close to the jacket, because we don't want a lot of wire overhanging. We don't want it to come into contact with another trace. So neatness does count. So we'll go ahead and put the first right here. Flip our board around. And again, just reconfirming where it goes. We'll follow it back one more time. We know we've already got this one covered. This is going to be the first one, and this is the second one we're working on. And we'll follow it over here. It'll wind around. There's the second part of it being broke, and then we'll wind up right here. So let's go ahead and attach that. And I don't like a lot of excessive wire. I leave a little bit of slack just so they can be bent and manipulated away from other things. And now we move on to the third trace. The third trace, it gets a little bit more complicated because these are really tiny. And so we know that this trace is broken right here where that board's broke. And so we follow it up, and it looks like it's coming right into the power switch. But I want to confirm that. So what I did was I scraped away some material so I could get down to the copper right here on this trace, and we're going to wring that out with a meter just to make sure. And again, it's looking like it's coming right here, and it is. And then of course it just ties into one end of the power switch. So we definitely want to make sure we get this one right. Now we'll follow that down to the other side. Of course, we know that we already got this one taken care of. And we know we've already got this one. So we're looking at this guy right here. So we'll follow it all the way over. And it's going to wind up being the first trace past the break right here. And again, I wasn't sure which pin it comes into the connector on. So I scraped away a little bit of copper right there. And it's pin 3. Well, that was interesting. My phone rang, and of course immediately as soon as that happens, it'll pause the video. And so we were picking up on the third trace that we're working on. which is the one connected to the power switch. And of course it winds its way down here. And this is where we made a little scratch in that coating so we could run the continuity to make sure we definitely had the right trace, which clearly we do. And then from that point, follow it down here, and it's not this trace, but this one, because we left off on this trace, or excuse me, we left off on this trace, the one in between, and we've already done that, so it's going to be the very last one riding on top of the thick trace. And so we come over to this point and we scraped away a little of the material there, and we rang that out to the third pin of that connector. So let's go ahead and attach a wire there. And again, I made us up some pre-made wires here just to get us started. Flip it around, and we're going to come in from the far side on this connector here. I may have cut that wire just a tad bit. No, it's not short. It's okay. And that looks pretty good. No issue there. And so then it looks like the next one, and the more wires you add to this, the more difficult it'll become trying to track them down, because you're tracing through all these wires as well. But it looks like past this one will be the one that's on the outside. And it's easy as to where it goes. It goes right there to that transistor. Let's see where it winds up on the other end. Comes down, and it's going to be this one right here. Actually, we have one before that. We have this, and this is why you have to be so careful with this. Because there's a trace right here that actually comes before this one. This one's the last one on this part of the board, but down here where the fracture covers 4 different traces, this one will go first. So let's go ahead and do this one. So let's follow that down. That'll be the second one. Comes up over to this side, and it looks like it goes right there to pin number 4. Let's get the meter turned on and let's ring that out. Just to make sure that's where it is, where it goes. And I'm going to try to scrape a little bit of that away so I can see. And I'm going to scrape it in a different place than where I scraped this one. That way I don't hit on the wrong one and get an incorrect reading. And I don't know how well the camera and the phone will focus on this or pick up on this, but all right, so let's see. It looks like it goes to pin 4 right here. And it does. It goes to pin 4 right there. And so, second trace up goes right there to pin 4. So let's get ourselves a wire. And again, we're just using the wire that I pulled off some connector from a TV or some other thing, piece of audio equipment. And we'll tin it up. And we'll trim it so we don't have that much overhang. We'll move down here and put it on there. Okay. Now let's go around to the other side. And we said pin 4. Which is that one right there. I'm going to double check. That is it. Let's put a little solder there. We'll kind of cut the wire down to length a little bit. And we'll probably trim a little bit of that off too. Just don't want these overhanging and possibly touching another part of this. So. And that looks pretty good too. So at this point, I think we got the basic idea of how to hardwire a board back together, so I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of these traces. There's not that many left, and then we'll come back and start assembling the board back into the front of it. But we're moving along pretty good here, so give me a few minutes for that, and we'll pick back up. As we come back in, let's have a look at the hardwiring as it's been finished up now. All the wires in place, and I went over this pretty good, checked it over a few different times, and it looks like pretty much every wire is in its own spot. Nothing's overhanging to another connection, and traced them all back a few different times just to make sure. And even with the most diligent care, it's easy to put one in the wrong spot, because the more you populate this board with wires, the less visibility you have trying to wring out traces. And even though there's not a lot here, there's only about 14 traces here, 15. It still does get a little confusing when you're running those wires, but it all looks okay, so I think we're gonna say it's good enough. Got the board screwed back in, didn't go crazy and start cranking down on these screws, just simply got it secured in place with no trouble. Everything went back together there with no problems at all. As for the front panel power switch, working fine, no trouble. So I think we're ready to reinstall this. In the process of putting this board back together, screwing the circuit board into the front, I dropped a screwdriver down on top of, accidentally dropped a screwdriver down on top of the mechanism and broke the flip door again. So we had to go back in for a second surgery on that. This time, since I lost the plastic piece, had to fashion another type of small hinge. It's going to be hard to pick this up. Used basically the lead off of a 1/4-inch resistor, bent it over and melted it into the flip door to try to get us a hinge for the flip door. Not that it's a big issue, but we've went this far, so why not? We'll take a quick look at this mechanism again. Only thing that really concerns me is if you look into this board, probably can look at it better this way. You'll see quite a few of those silver caps. I didn't bother with the ESR meter. I figured that if it don't work, we might head there first and look. Could possibly be it. But other than that, it all looks okay. Laser cables, everything is in place. No fractures here. I went over this board real well. Didn't see anything. And so hopefully we're okay. I think the thing to do now is just get it all back together I'll put it all back in the frame, and we'll hit the switch and we'll see if it'll turn on. So give me a second to get this all back together and we'll come back. Okay, so we'll come back in and I'll show you what I already know. Got the front panel put back on, all the ribbon connectors in place, ground cables in place, and we do have a standby light, and if we push power, it does turn on. No issue there. And we do have yet another unit with a weak display tube. It looks a little dim to me. I don't know if there would have been some sort of function on the remote control to dim this. I'm totally reaching, but it probably is just a dim display tube. I got a few discs. First I have one sealed in the package, and then I have my test disc from my shop, and I have a disc I use to record on. So we'll start off with my test playback disc. Goes in, sucks it down, and it does start spinning. Oh yeah. And it does read the table of contents. It shows one track on that disc, and I do remember after I put this in and checked it, I remembered what I recorded on this, and it does play. If we hit play, it tells you what's on the disc. I recorded some docking from the Shadow Life album on this, and it shows that it's working. And so obviously that's pretty exciting, but as far as audio, I haven't hooked it up. I think the next thing to do, let's go ahead and get it routed over into the mixer and input and output, and let's do a little test playback and let's do a little test record. Let's see what it'll do. So give me a second for that, and we'll get the audio connections made and see what our little beat up and battered up mini disc player will do for us. So give me a second for that. All right, we'll pick back up. I got the mini disc player routed over into the mixer and got the laptop dumped into the input as a source so we can do a little recording with it, assuming that it will record. But from what we know so far, it will count table of contents, or it will read table of contents and count down the time. Let's go ahead and put this disc back in it. You would have never convinced me that this thing would play a disc when I seen it, took it out of the box, and parts were just shaking around on the inside of it. So I guess it takes a little determination to try to get it fixed, but it is working. Let's see what the audio sounds like. Well, it is definitely working. There's no question about that. The song that we're listening to, this is from the Shadow Life album by Dokken. And Dokken made this maybe late 90s, early 2000s. This was what was considered to be their alternative album. And I like the one prior to this. The self-titled one was way better than this one. This was just a little bit too far out of the norm. Although there is a song on this album that Jeff Pilson sings that's really, really good, but I don't remember what it is. And clearly it's not on here. There's only one track, and it's probably just this track. So, but it is working. It seems to be kicking along pretty good here.
on a string, on a string.
Well, okay, we got a working unit that'll play back, so the next thing, let's put in the other disc. I don't guess it really matters. I guess you can record on this disc. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like you can record on this. So I wonder what all this is about. Yeah, I think I had originally thought maybe this was for finalizing, but you know, maybe you don't need to finalize these. I don't remember. Maybe it just works the way that it is. All right, let's go ahead and let's crank up something from that Saigon Kick album we were listening to in the beginning of this video. Let me find that real quick. This album has one of the best remakes I've ever heard of a David Bowie song. All right, let's try this one. This is Space Oddity by David Bowie, and I've rarely heard a David Bowie cover that I could appreciate, but this one I definitely can. Well, it seems to be doing just fine. Let's go ahead and stop it. And it should pick up with that being track number 2. It's thinking about it. And this display is really, really dim, so it's very difficult to see what's going on here. All right, let's move to track 2. And let's play it back. I don't know, it sounds pretty good to me. Digital audio. Basically just a shrunken down compact disc. Does a real nice job, it seems like. So you never would have convinced me this thing would have ever worked. I knew I could get it to turn on, but I was really skeptical about this thing actually reading a disc and playing back a disc. So couldn't be more surprised, to be quite honest with you. So let me go ahead and put the screws back in the bottom of it, holding on the front mask. Let's put the lid on it, and let's do a final record test on this, and we'll wrap this one up. So give me a second for that. Okay, we'll pick back up and bring to a close the Sony MDS-JE320 MiniDisc player. And I believe this would have been the last entry of any type of mechanical device used for music, because MP3 would have been right after this, I believe, and that would have been the end of it. No more motors, no more moving parts, everything embedded into a small chip. And as soulless as it is quite convenient. I even use it myself, not for anything serious. I like to consider it to be the fast food of music listening. If I want to listen to anything serious, I'll usually get out a compact disc or get out an album and include even a tape. But the MP3 would obviously put an end to all of this. I don't believe there's anywhere you can go and purchase anything like this brand new anymore. Perhaps maybe turntables, as they're making some kind of a resurgence, but I'm not sure about anything like this. I haven't really went out to Best Buy or any of the other stores that carry these type of things and seen what's on the market, so I don't have an idea. But this was a fun one. I bought this just as a project to do for the video, and what kills me is if this had not have gotten damaged in shipping, the only thing really wrong with this, from what I could tell from the picture, was this button was pushed into the front panel, which in my estimation would have equaled it was holding the power switch low and not allowing it to turn on. Maybe. There may have been a fracture there, but it certainly wasn't the one that we seen, because the picture in the auction description, there's no cracks on the front. Everything looks real good. So if that hadn't have occurred during shipping, this thing would have definitely been a resellable item. But as it is, it's definitely works. There's no question about that. But cosmetically, it's just so deformed that you'd really just need to only have it just for usage, not for viewing, I guess you would say. So I made us a song on the blank disc from my bench test disc. So we're going to play a little bit of this, and then we'll put this one to an end. Thank you guys very much for hanging out and for checking out the video for this, and all the videos. If you are a frequent watcher of the channel, I appreciate it. And I'm always trying to find something that I've worked on in the past. All of this equipment at one time or another I was doing pretty frequently, although I never seen a lot of these. But of course, back in the day when one of these would come in under warranty, this type of cosmetic damage wouldn't have been covered. But if the customer would have dropped this somehow and inadvertently broke it, then they would have been quoted for a whole new front piece. There would have been no gluing or melting it back together. And as for the circuit board I probably would have been okay with hardwiring that. I don't think there's no issue whatsoever with that board. That board is not going to come back apart unless the same kind of impact brings it back apart. But the cosmetic things they would have had to have paid for and had replaced. So interesting. Good old unit. 1998, I believe, is what I tracked this back to. So let's hear a little bit of this. We're in this kind of groove of music where we're doing these 90s things, and thought this was a song that caught my attention back in the day. Let's hear a little bit of this on the way out.
In was an evening I shared with the sun.